The folder on my kitchen table had been sitting there for 3 days before I finally opened it. My mother had left it during what she called a quick visit, which meant she let herself in with the spare key I'd stupidly never asked back, set the folder down between my coffee maker and my fruit bowl, and said, "Read it when you're ready. We've all signed it." I didn't touch it for 72 hours. I told myself I was busy. I was finishing a contract, I had a dentist appointment, I needed to reorganize my pantry. All of it was true and none of it was the reason. On the third morning, I poured my coffee, sat down and opened it. The document inside had been printed on actual legal paper. Someone had gone to a Staples or maybe an actual lawyer's office and had this typed up properly. At the top it said, "Voluntary dissolution of family ties, mutual agreement of the undersigned." Below that were 6 signatures: my mother, my father, my older brother, his wife, my aunt on my mother's side, my grandmother. I read her name 3 times. The signature was shaky, the way her handwriting had gotten in the last few years, but it was hers. I sat with that for a long moment. Then I closed the folder, finished my coffee, and went to work. I should explain what I do because it matters. For the past 4 years, I'd been working as a senior project coordinator at a mid-size construction and development firm based in Ottawa. We handled large-scale commercial builds, municipal contracts, that kind of thing. I was not the flashiest person in the room. I wore sensible shoes and I brought my lunch and I stayed late when the timelines required it, which was often. My manager, a very precise man named Mr. Harrington, who communicated primarily in bullet points, had told me during my last review that I was indispensable in a way that doesn't always get noticed. I'd thanked him and then gone home and thought about that for longer than I should have. The reason it matters is that 6 weeks before my mother left that folder on my table, I had been quietly headhunted by a company called Ridgecroft Infrastructure Partners. They were a Toronto-based firm, relatively new, well-funded, and they were expanding aggressively into Quebec and Ontario municipal contracts. The woman who contacted me, their VP of operations, had found me through a colleague. She'd been thorough. She knew my project history. She knew which bids I'd managed. She knew things about my work that even some of my own co-workers didn't know. We'd had 4 conversations over 3 weeks. Very professional, very careful. I hadn't told anyone. Not because I was decided yet, and I didn't share things I hadn't decided. That habit, keeping things close until they were certain, is probably the thing my family misunderstood most about me. They read silence as shame. They read caution as defeat. When I didn't announce things, they assumed there was nothing to announce. They had been assuming that for 31 years. My family's issue with me, the foundational one underneath all the others, was that I had not become what they expected. My brother had gone into accounting, married someone from a good family in Nepean, bought a house in Kannada, and produced 2 children who played rep hockey. My parents spoke about his life, the way people describe a project that came in on time and under budget, with quiet, satisfied relief. I had moved to Ottawa at 22 for a job and stayed. I rented an apartment I loved in Centertown, on a street with good coffee shops and a farmer's market on Saturdays. I had a cat named after a minor historical figure. I went hiking alone on long weekends. I dated, sometimes seriously, but I hadn't married. And at 31, that fact had calcified in my family's mind into something close to a personal failing. The construction work confused them. My mother had wanted me to go into education or healthcare, something she could describe easily at her book club. Project coordinator required a paragraph and still left people nodding without quite understanding. The first major rupture had been 2 Christmases ago when my brother's wife made a comment about my apartment. Something about how it must be nice to have such a simple life, not having to worry about school districts or mortgage rates. And I had responded, not rudely but directly, that simplicity was a choice and not a consolation prize. She had gone very quiet. My brother had looked at the table. My mother had changed the subject with the kind of speed that suggested she'd been waiting to need to. After that, every family gathering had a quality of managed tension. Things were said carefully. I was included but at a slight remove, the way you include someone you're not entirely sure about. I thought I understood the limits. I did not understand they'd been building a case. The folder, apparently, was the conclusion of a conversation that had been happening without me for over a year. I found this out because my cousin called me 3 days after the folder appeared, and she told me everything the way she always did, in one long breath, while I stood in my kitchen holding a spatula. My mother had first raised the idea, apparently, at a family dinner I hadn't been invited to. The phrasing she'd used was that I was pulling away from the family and that it might be better for everyone to make it official. My aunt had agreed, my grandmother, and this was the part that I had to ask my cousin to repeat. My grandmother had been told that I had said things about her that I hadn't said. My cousin wasn't sure exactly what. Something about money, maybe, or the will. Whatever it was, it had worked. My grandmother had signed. My brother, my cousin said, had been quiet in that meeting for a long time and then he'd signed too. I thanked my cousin for telling me. I put down the spatula. I fed the cat. I did not call my mother. I did not call my brother, but I thought about calling my grandma first, and I needed to be calm when I did, and I was not calm. Instead, I called Ridgecroft's VP of Operations and told her I was ready to discuss terms. We negotiated for 2 weeks. I brought in a lawyer for the contract review. My own lawyer, someone a colleague had recommended, not family adjacent in any way. The package they were offering was significant, not extravagant, but serious. A director-level title, a salary that was roughly 40% higher than what I was making, relocation assistance to Toronto, and a seat at the leadership table for their Ontario expansion. The thing they most wanted from me, the reason they'd come looking, was my track record with municipal contract compliance. I had spent 4 years building relationships with city procurement offices and understanding the specific language those contracts required. It was not glamorous work, it was the kind of thing people overlooked until something went wrong, and then suddenly it was the most important thing in the room. I signed on a Thursday afternoon. My lawyer shook my hand. I went home, ordered Thai food, and watched something I'd been meaning to watch for 6 months. I told no one in my family. I did tell my manager the following Monday with 4 weeks' notice and a detailed transition document I'd already started preparing. He read the transition document and said, "You really are indispensable in a way that doesn't always get noticed." "I know," I said, and this time I didn't go home and think about it. 6 weeks later, Ridgecroft held what they called a stakeholder introduction event in Ottawa. It was partly practical. They were announcing their Ontario expansion formally and wanted to meet with city contacts, municipal reps, people in the procurement ecosystem, and partly a signal that they were serious players. The venue was a hotel conference space near the Byward Market, the kind of room with good catering and little else to recommend it. My mother called 2 days before the event. Not about the event, she didn't know about it. She called because my aunt was having a birthday dinner that weekend and wanted to know if I was coming. I said I had a work commitment. She was quiet for a moment. Then she said, in the particular tone she used when she wanted to sound casual and wasn't, "Is everything okay with work?" "Everything's fine," I said. "Give my aunt my best." I didn't tell her about the event. I didn't tell her I was about to be introduced, publicly and formally, as Ridgecroft Infrastructure Partners' new Director of Contract Operations for Ontario. I didn't mention that the stakeholder list for the event included people from 3 Ottawa city departments, 2 of which my father had worked with for years before his retirement. Small world. I had learned my family's lesson about silence. I just applied it differently. The event was on a Saturday. I know. Saturday. I'd raised an eyebrow at that too, but Ridgecroft's CEO had explained that municipal contacts were easier to get on weekends, no competing priorities, people showed up less distracted. It was an odd choice that apparently worked. I arrived early, the way I always do, checked in with the events coordinator, reviewed the run of show. My role was straightforward. I would be introduced by the CEO during the formal remarks, I'd say a few words, I'd work the room afterward. Nothing I hadn't done before in smaller configurations. What I had not anticipated was my parents walking in at 11:15. Was standing near the registration table when I saw them. My father first. He's tall, and his grey coat is distinctive, and then my mother beside him, holding a small gift bag that I recognized as my aunt's style of wrapping. They were not there for the event. They were, I realized, cutting through the hotel lobby on the way to my aunt's birthday lunch, which was apparently being held in the restaurant on the other side of the building. My mother saw me at the same moment I saw her. She stopped. The gift bag swayed. She said something to my father without looking away from me, and he turned and found me too. I gave them a small nod, the way you acknowledge someone in a professional setting when there isn't time for a full conversation. Then I turned back to the events coordinator and picked up where we'd left off. Behind me, I could feel them not leaving. The formal remarks started at 11:30. I stood to the side of the room while the CEO, a measured, plain-spoken woman named Dr. O.C. Bonsu, outlined Ridgecroft's expansion plans and why they mattered for Ontario infrastructure. She was good at this. Concrete, specific, no unnecessary flourish. The room was attentive. My parents, I could see in my peripheral vision, had drifted into the back of the space. My mother had set down the gift bag. They were not going to the birthday lunch. Ridgecroft's Ontario operations will be anchored by someone who has spent the last 4 years building exactly the kind of municipal relationships this expansion requires, Dr. Ozi Bonsu said. Her track record in contract compliance, her knowledge of procurement processes in this region, and frankly her reputation among the people in this room made this decision straightforward for us. Please welcome our new Director of Contract Operations for Ontario. She said my name. I walked to the front of the room. I thanked her, said a few things I'd prepared, brief, grounded, specific, and looked out at a room full of people I'd worked alongside for years, several of whom I could see registering something between surprise and recognition. Oh, that's where she went. I did not look at the back of the room until I was done. When I did, my mother's hand was over her mouth. The reception afterward was 90 minutes. I worked through it the way I always work events, methodically, purposefully, one conversation at a time. There were municipal contacts to introduce myself to properly, colleagues from my old firm who'd shown up as stakeholders and needed a moment of context, Ridgecroft team members I was meeting in person for the first time. My parents stood near the wall for about 20 minutes. Then my father touched my mother's arm and they moved toward me. I finished my conversation, turned and waited. My mother reached me first. She looked like she'd been running calculations and couldn't make them add up. We didn't know, she said, about any of this. I know, I said. My father said, why didn't you tell us? I looked at him for a moment. You signed a document dissolving our family relationship. Did you want a career update? He opened his mouth. He closed it. My mother said, quickly, it was a complicated time. Your father and I were worried about you. We thought. I know what you thought, I said. Not harshly. Just evenly, the way you speak when you've already moved past needing something to be different. You thought I was failing quietly and it embarrassed you. She didn't deny it. That, more than anything, told me what I needed to know. I told them I had to continue working the room. I told them I hoped my aunt had a good birthday lunch. I meant both of those things. My brother called that evening. He'd gotten a call from my mother. I let it ring twice, then answered, because avoiding it wasn't going to change anything. He started with, so I heard what happened today, and there was something in his voice that wasn't quite guilt and wasn't quite relief. Something unresolved. I said, how's the family? Good. Good. The kids are, yeah, they're good. A pause. I didn't know about the job. You should have told me. I found I'd expected him to say. Would it have changed anything? With the document? A long pause, long enough that I understood. I don't know, he said finally. Maybe that honesty cost him something, I could tell. My brother was not a dishonest person. He was a person who made the easier choice when the easier choice was available, and standing up at that dinner table would not have been easy. I knew that. I'd known that about him for 20 years. I appreciate you saying that, I said. Are you okay? I'm better than okay. He didn't have anything to add to that. We said goodbye the way siblings do when there's more to say and neither person is ready to say it, and I hung up and sat on my couch for a while with the cat on my lap, watching the streetlights come on outside. I called my grandmother the next morning. She picked up on the second ring, which meant she'd been expecting me or hoping for me, which amounted to the same thing. I asked her directly. I said, "What did they tell you?" I said. She was quiet for a moment. Then she sighed, the way she did when she was setting something down she'd been carrying. "That you told your mother you didn't want anything to do with the family money, that you'd said that you didn't think I'd be around much longer and you didn't want the complications." I sat with that for a moment. "I never said that," I told her. "I've never thought that. The money has nothing to do with why I'm not around more. It's how things got." She was quiet again. Then she said, "I know that. I think I knew that. Why did you sign it?" Another long pause. "I was tired," she said. "They were so certain. And I thought, maybe I didn't know you the way I thought I did. You always kept things so close." "I know," I said. "I'm sorry I wasn't clearer." We talked for another hour, longer than we'd talked in years. She told me about her garden, which had been bad this year for tomatoes but excellent for zucchini. I told her about the new job, Toronto, what I was looking forward to, and what I was nervous about. She asked good questions. She always had. When we said goodbye, she said, "Come see me before you move." I said I would. I meant it. My mother sent me an email 2 weeks later. She'd written it carefully. You could tell every sentence felt measured. She said that she had been reacting out of fear, not malice, that she had watched me move further from the family year by year and hadn't known how to talk to me about it, that the document had been a mistake she couldn't fully explain, that she hoped I could understand even if I couldn't forgive. I read it twice. Then I wrote back. I told her I wasn't angry. That was true. Anger would have required me to be surprised, and I hadn't been, not really. The folder on my kitchen table had not been a shock. It had been a confirmation of something I'd been sensing for a long time without wanting to name it. I told her that I wasn't coming home for the summer, that I was in the process of relocating and getting settled, that maybe at Christmas we could figure out what things looked like now. I told her I hoped she was taking care of herself. I did not apologize. I did not offer to repair things on a timeline that suited anyone but me. I did not leave the door wide open. I left it ajar. That was what I could honestly offer. She replied with 3 sentences. She said she understood. She said the door was always open at her end. She said she was proud of me, and she put it at the end like an afterthought, like something she hadn't been sure she was allowed to say. I didn't respond to that part. It was too soon for that to land the way it might have, once. I moved to Toronto on a Friday in October, which in Toronto meant the maples on the side streets were exactly the red you don't quite believe is real until you're standing inside it. I had a moving company, a very good center-town apartment. I was subletting to a graduate student who promised to keep the cat's feeding schedule consistent, and a new apartment in the Leslieville neighborhood that I hadn't finished unpacking yet. On my first Monday at Ridgecroft's Toronto office, Dr. Ozzy Bonsu stopped by my desk at the end of the day. She set down a very good bottle of Ontario wine and said, "How was the first day? Productive?" I said, "Good." She paused. "Also, I've heard a few things about what happened at the Ottawa event. After you've been here a bit and you feel like it, I'd be glad to listen if you want to talk about it. But only if you want to." I looked at her for a moment. "I might take you up on that," I said. "Not today, whenever," she said. And she left. I sat at my desk a while longer after she'd gone. The office was mostly empty, people filtering out in the early evening, the kind of quiet that settles in around 5:30 on a fall Monday. Through the window I could see a small wedge of Lake Ontario, flat and dark in the distance. I had moved to this city with a folder of legal paper and a job title and a cat still technically in Ottawa and a family that didn't know what to do with me and never entirely had. That was enough to know. That was the right amount. I picked up my bag, turned off my desk lamp, and took the stairs down to the street, where the October air smelled like lake water and the first reasonable cold, and I walked toward the subway, thinking about nothing in particular except what I wanted for dinner.